It's hard to imagine that Illinois was called the West. The Northwest. There was a Northwest Ordinance, 1787 or something like that. That was Illinois, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. That was the Northwest Territory. So in 1860, starting in 1860, the U.S. population was roughly 32 million people. You can imagine that. About 4 million of those were slaves, mainly in the Deep South. You look at a map of concentration of slavery, the Upper South, it's real sparse. Not many people owned very many slaves. A lot of people didn't own slaves, and mainly they owned 2 or 3 slaves. But we hear about the big plantations with 300 slaves, but the fact is that most people didn't own slaves, and those who did owned very few. The 11 Confederate states had 9 million people, a third of which were slaves. There were counties in which slaves outnumbered the white folk by a lot, and that made the white folk a little nervous. And they got nervouser and nervouser as time went on. Soldiers were considered 18 to 45 years old. There were 1 million fighting men in the South and a little over 2 million fighting men in the North. The 22 states had 23 million compared to 9 in the South. This is sort of why the South didn't win. The South had 18,000 factories with 100,000 workers, and the North had 110,000 factories with over 1 million people working. When Lincoln was about 7, his family moved from where? You know it's going to be a quiz.
Kentucky.
Where was Lincoln born?
Kentucky.
Kentucky, yes. And they moved to Indiana. And I saw this on the History Channel, so it must be true. I saw it on TV. but I looked it up, and Indiana has 23,125,000 acres. At Lincoln's time, 23 million of those acres were still wilderness. In 60 years, that was all gone. All gone. The grass, the prairie grass in Illinois was so tall, how tall? So tall, that it would conceal a man on horseback across Illinois. There's just a patch of that left up in northeastern Illinois. Everybody knew everybody. We'll have songs about generals and all that. West Point graduating classes were 37 to 60 people. And it was the only engineering school in the United States. There were probably 100 elite families. I say 100, but everybody knew everybody. They were very elite families. The issues had been brewing for Civil War. The issues had been brewing for years. In 1832, South Carolina wanted to nullify tariffs. Oh, I'm a state. If we don't like the federal law, null and void. And believe it or not, about 3 years ago, I read in the paper a South Carolina senator wanted to get into nullification again. It's like, no, dude, the Supreme Court. Anyhow. 1850s, Bleeding Kansas, which I personally believe was really the start of the Civil War. John Brown, body lies of older than good old John Brown, boy. Good old John Brown, his son summarily executed 5 people with the broadsword, the pro-slavery folks. There was a guy named there was a general, States Rights Geist. That was his name, States Rights. His dad had been governor of Georgia. States Rights Geist, they called him States. Hey, States, how you doing? His brother's name was Independence. That's like naming your kid gun control. Or pro-life. During the whole of their lives, Stephen Douglas and Jefferson Davis were more widely known than Lincoln for the whole of their lives. Davis was really powerful in the Senate. So Douglas was just kind of controlled the Senate. Before the Civil War, people said the United States are. The United States are. Plural. After the war, we say the United States is, singular. So the war not only changed our perception, but also changed our language. And those always go hand in hand, right? The perceptions go with your language. I said this, the day before Lincoln was shot, he was one of the, truly, he was one of the most reviled persons in America. He was not, but the day after he was shot, he became our greatest hero. And this lady in the eye goes, the very next day? I went, it's kind of metaphorical. And then, so we'll start with the 1860 election. In 1860, Lincoln was the lightweight of all of those. There were 4 candidates, and there are 4 vice presidential candidates, so 8 guys. Lincoln was the 8th as far as political experience. He was a lightweight. He'd done a lot of, I don't, does anybody know offhand how many terms he served in the Illinois House of Representatives, but he served several terms there, I think. He served one term in U.S. Congress. He was elected in 47 and served from 48 to 50. The only time he was in federal government. All these other guys, we will learn, they were governors, senators, congressmen, ambassadors, cabinet members. Every one of them was at least, I'll say around 5, but at least 2 of those things. Most of them. Lincoln, not so.